Warm greetings from the High 10. It is Everyday Shenanigans on this Wednesday, Hump Day, April 1st, April Fool's Day. Have mercy. Hope you all are staying safe out there. And we're going to get through this coronavirus. And I'm praying for all of you out there. But I will be bringing you back-to-back videos today pertaining to the coronavirus. And the first set of information is by statesman.com. Fact check. Is Chinese culture to blame for the coronavirus? In separate interviews with reporters on March 18th, U.S. Senator John Cornyn, Republican, Texas, said China has been the source of multiple recent contagions, breaking out because of what he called a culture of eating some animals such as bats, snakes, and dogs. In remarks captured by The Hill, Cornyn said this applies to the new coronavirus. China is to blame because it's a culture where people eat bats and snakes and dogs and things like that. These viruses are transmitted from the animal to the people, and that's why China has been the source of a lot of these viruses, like SARS, like MERS, the swine flu, and now the coronavirus, he said. I think they have a fundamental problem, and I don't object to geographically identifying where it is coming from. He made a similar comment on a weekly conference call with reporters in Texas, stating that the open meat markets that serve everything from bats to tapirs to snake to dog meat allow viruses to jump from animals to humans. The Hill's video clip of Cornyn's remark was shared thousands of times on social media, so we'll focus on fact-checking that statement, keeping the context of his second claim in mind. Cornyn spokesman Drew Brandewee said Cornyn's statement is referring to the culture behind so-called wet markets in China. If people didn't eat that type of meat, wet markets would not exist, he said in an interview, referencing the animals Cornyn identified in his remarks. And when you go through this article, they'll give you all the said sources that they contacted and looked up for verification. It says, let's dive in. SARS, MERS, and swine flu. Before we address the parts of Cornyn's claim related to coronavirus, let's take a look at his assertion that the viruses SARS, MERS, and swine flu originate in China. Cornyn is right about SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, which was first reported in 2003 in Guangdong province of southern China, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. SARS is thought to be an animal virus, but its source remains uncertain. It is believed to have spread from the source animal to other animals and infected animals according to the World Health Organization. But Cornyn is wrong about where the first MERS and swine flu cases were reported. Sorry, getting notifications. Brandewee said Cornyn misspoke when he included them in his list. MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, was first reported in Saudi Arabia in 2012, according to the CDC. Swine flu, or the H1N1 flu, was identified in humans in the United States in 2009, according to the CDC. Transmission of the virus. The first part of Cornyn's claim states that people in China eat bats and snakes and dogs and things like that. But Peter Lee, associate professor of East Asian politics at the University of Houston, said this type of cuisine is not representative of Chinese culture. Chinese as a whole do not have wildlife eating habit, Lee said in an email. It is the eating habit of a small number of people, just like a small number of people in the U.S. dare to eat rattlesnakes or the like. The eating habit is not Chinese and not traditional. Make sure you heard that, okay? Even considering the small population that may consume these animals, Adam Cameron Scott, an associate professor of global health security at the University of Sydney in Australia, said the consumption of exotic meats is not in itself the problem. The issue is instead the level and extent of the human-animal interface that wet markets permit, he said in an email. Having said this, we have yet to identify the host animal for the COVID-19 virus. It has also not been verified whether the COVID-19 virus infected humans at the wet market in Wuhan, only that some of the first cases to be identified had a history of having visited the wet market. Okay. These things keep jumping up on my screen. The CDC situation page for the new viruses states that early cases in China had some link to the market, as did numerous news articles highlighted by Brandewee in response to PolitiFact's inquiry. But researchers have yet to pinpoint when, where, or how the virus was transmitted from animals to humans. It was originally suggested that it began at the Wuhan fish market, but there is no longer good evidence to support that, said Vincent Racaniello, a virology professor at the microbiology and immunology department at Columbia University, who is researching the virus. The first case was not associated with the market, and now we think there were earlier clusters in November not associated with the market. Racaniello pointed to a paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine at the end of January by researchers in China looking at the first 425 confirmed cases of the virus. Ooh, I wish these people quit sending me stuff on my phone. They just keep pinging my phone with all these conspiracy theories. I had just about enough. Sorry about that. The data shows that while the first reported cases of the new virus were linked to the Hunan seafood wholesale market in Wuhan, the first identified case of the virus predated the publicly reported cases and was found in a person with no connection to the market. Other researchers also identified early cases unrelated to the market. In the March 15th episode of his virology podcast, This Week in Virology, Racaniello interviewed coronavirus researcher Ralph Baric of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill about the origins of the current pandemic. Baric said researchers have identified numerous SARS-like strains in bats and said it is just a question of time for when a human comes in contact with a bat carrying these viruses and that sparks a new pandemic. He added that it is entirely possible that the current outbreak was caused by a person in rural China who came into contact with a bat or a bat guana and then traveled to Wuhan and started the outbreak. Baric said the initial contact could have occurred in a farmer harvesting bat guana to use as fertilizer or just by random chance in a person who came into contact with bat guano when a bat flew overhead and its droppings fell. It's true that markets that sell live animals that are slaughtered on the premises pose a risk of viruses to be transmitted from animals to humans, but experts said the risk exists across the globe and is not unique to China. His claim, if it were true, is ridiculous, said Lee, the University of Houston professor. No country in the world monopolizes the outbreaks of epidemics. Racaniello said that suggesting the new coronavirus is spread simply by eating a bat is too simplistic, as is pointing only to China as the source of new viruses. If you eliminated all eating of bats, you would still have these spillovers, he said. The 4 mild coronaviruses we have probably crossed from bats into humans hundreds of years ago. That could have happened anywhere. This is much broader than eating a bat in a meat market. I think that's the important key here, that there are a lot of ways for viruses to get from various animals into humans. Peter Daszak, a disease ecologist and president of the research organization EcoHealth Alliance, said global health experts discussed the potential of a new pandemic in 2018, labeling it Disease X, as pandemics are on the rise and the world's strategy for dealing with these illnesses is woefully inadequate. In an op-ed for the New York Times, Daszak wrote, "These spillovers are increasingly exponentially as our ecological footprint brings us closer to wildlife in remote areas, and the wildlife trade brings these animals into urban centers. Unprecedented road building, deforestation, land clearing, and agricultural development, as well as globalized travel and trade, make us supremely susceptible to pathogens like coronaviruses." Science writer David Quammen discussed future risks during an interview on NPR's Fresh Air in February and said the reason the globe is seeing more viruses in humans is because we are so abundant and so disruptive on this planet that we come in contact with these things. There's 7.7 billion of us. We're cutting the tropical forests. We're building work camps in those forests and villages. We're eating the wildlife. We're transporting wildlife around the world. We're raising a lot of domestic livestock that become exposed to viruses through wildlife. We're doing all of these forms of disruption that I say sometimes, that you go into a forest and you shake the trees, literally and figuratively, and viruses fall out. And if they fall out on their host, they need a new host. And we're there. We're available. We're their opportunity. And then we fly around the world and carry it every which way. Cornyn said China is to blame because the culture where people eat bats and snakes and dogs and things like that, these viruses are transmitted from the animal to the people, and that's why China has been the source of a lot of these viruses, like SARS, like MERS, swine flu, and now the coronavirus. First of all, Cornyn is wrong that MERS and the swine flu were the first identified in humans in China. He is right that SARS and the new coronavirus were first identified in humans there. The problem with Cornyn's claim is his assertion that Chinese culture is at fault. Experts said the threat of viral transmission from animal to human is not unique to China, and the risk of this kind of spillover is growing globally as humans come into closer contact with animals. Plus, experts noted that any consumption of the animals Cornyn mentioned is not in itself the problem. It is also worth noting that researchers have not pinpointed exactly when, where, or how the coronavirus hopped from animals to humans. While early reports indicated that the virus jumped from animals to humans at a seafood market in Wuhan, further study has identified cases predating those in people with no connection to the market. Taken as a whole, Cornyn's statement is not accurate. We rate this claim false. And this is by statesman.com if you need verification. Sorry, it's so winded, but it was long. So basically, this article is stating that they do not agree with the politicians Cornyn's theory that this is China's fault. They're basically saying that they've talked to many experts that say eating wildlife and would not, it could happen anywhere, because obviously it happened here in America with the swine flu. Transmission from animal to human happened in America with the swine flu. So it's not necessarily eating wildlife, wild animals can cause just the problem. It can be numerous ways of getting it. Not just eating wildlife, but it could be eating it, touching it, handling it, being near it, droppings from an animal, coming into contact, I guess, with their fecal matter, which we already know that anyway. But the point is, everybody needs somebody to blame. Most people do. And the fact that this first outbreak took place in China, whether it was from the market, whether it was from a few people who were sick in November, but you didn't know as of yet what was going on with them, the point is, the outbreak did start there. That's the point of the story. And whether it was a bat, a pangolin, a dog, a cat, a monkey, the origin of the virus emanated in China. And that's what people are looking at. And people need a scapegoat. That's just common sense. Whenever something goes wrong, bump in the night, we look for someone to blame. That's just the way it is. And I still think that handling the meat products there in that market was dangerous to the livelihood of everyone involved. I've seen pictures yesterday on social media, YouTube videos, whatever, of those markets, and they look unkempt. The floors look nasty. The thing that they're sitting up on to hold the meat doesn't look sanitary. The side of it looked unsanitary. So in my mind, those things matter to me. If I was going to purchase meat, I don't care if I'm in the States. I want to see that it looks halfway decent. At least the case looks different, looks decent that you're holding the meat in. Now, I can't see behind where they're cutting the meat. You understand? I wasn't there when they got the meat. You understand what I'm saying? Killed the meat, just keeping it real. But we're leaning on faith that the process was proper. And you can't think a process is proper if you go and see the meat lying out on the table, the block, or whatever you want to call it, and it looks nasty in there, and the floors look nasty, walls look nasty. Why would I think the meat is fresh? And that's another thing too. Handling those raw meats like that openly. Then I saw a picture of that same pangolin laying out on tables in Africa. We already know the climate there is very hot. So you have to use common sense. If you leave something out in the heat, what is it going to do? It's going to bake. It's going to fry. So you're taking raw meat, lying it out in a hot climate, and it's sitting out there for how many hours before people purchase it all? And then what do you do with the rest the rest of the meat that you have lying out. See, people don't think about stuff like that. I don't think those people who are buying that thinks like that. And as I told you all in my previous video about the pangolin, those poachers have left China to now go to sub-Saharan Africa to get the pangolin. And I saw with my own eyes a meat market in Africa with the pangolins laid out. And the first thing I thought was, this is barbaric as hell. Seeing a picture of a freezer that was nasty. The top of the freezer was nasty in Africa. And I thought, he had the nerve to flip that thing open and then boom, pull out frozen meat of wild animals, monkeys, dogs, all that kind of crazy stuff. And in my mind, I'm thinking, dang, how you just gonna throw the whole meat, the whole carcass in the freezer? You didn't even cut it up, cut the head off, the toes, y'all see where I'm going with that? So hell yeah, that's gonna be a problem. You're throwing a whole carcass of an animal in a freezer. You don't even have it cut up. So you're seeing the whole animal as itself frozen. And then the freezer is nasty all around it, the crevices, the top was dirty, and you're taking that same meat and selling it to the general public. So yeah, people would have a problem once they see these type of pictures floating around. And I don't care where it is, but it's over there. And I have yet to see a fresh market like that here in the States, where you've got wild animals laid out on tables for you to go pick like you're at a flea market. Whatever your thoughts are about this pandemic, they are your own. If you think this is a conspiracy, if you think this is the government's doing, if you think it's China's fault, whoever's fault, the problem is still that this is a deadly pandemic, and that so far we don't know what actually caused it, but they do believe it's animal to human. I think that's the best assumption that the experts can come up with. But the point still remains is that it emanated from China, and we now see the pictures of the open wet markets, blah, 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 and it doesn't look good. And yes, anybody can get contaminated food, unsafe practices all over the world, stateside, America, wherever, but the point just remains that this virus came from there, whether it was due to the market or not. And then frankly, that's even worse. If you want to say, oh, some people were sick over there in November and they weren't affiliated with the market, it's still bad either way. They came in contact with something or someone who was sick, and then they became ill. So either way you look at it, somebody was tainted over there, came into contact with this virus, passed it to this person, and then that person passed it on, as they say, a host. It went from host to host. It left China to Italy, Spain, the UK, America. So it's bad, no matter who had it first, who passed it along, it's everywhere now. God bless America. I'm praying for all of you. I don't know how long this quarantine is going to last with us having to stay in. Most of us are still venturing out for needs or just to get fresh air. Most of us probably got cabin fever, and you will after some point, especially if you are a person who is accustomed to going out and doing lots of daily activities. But please stay in if you can, because you see this isn't getting better, and I doubt that this is going to be an Easter situation that lasts just to Easter. I'd say it's going to last way longer than that, even longer than the end of the month, because they don't have no information to say what it's going to be, how long it's going to last. Can't say. If you don't have a lot of information about a virus, you can't say how long it's going to last. You got to have a cure. You got to have a vaccination. Those are the things that can help get a timeline on the virus. Please stay safe out there. Keep up your hygiene. Wash your hands. If you need, wear your mask, your gloves, whichever you prefer, but just probably stay in. It's probably the safest and limit dealing with people. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks for joining me. God bless you all. God bless America. God bless the people abroad. Thanks for listening. You all stay safe out there. And this is Everyday Shenanigans. Bye-bye.